Hey guys, it's Luton here, and so today I've got a little bit more of a thoughtful video, which is kind of nice actually, because I haven't had one of these for a while, and I know that you guys as subscribers do enjoy these kind of more thoughtful videos, more vague videos perhaps, and often a lot of the stuff you find yourself doing now with YouTube and covering, for example, Battlefield is the main thing that I guess I cover. I don't get so much opportunity to just kind of think around things. Now, okay, alright, this video is still about Battlefield, but still, I wanted this to be a bit more unscripted, although interesting actually, a lot of my videos are unscripted now, and you know, when I originally started doing YouTube, I used to script a lot, because it's very, very hard to kind of think about everything that you want to say while you're recording, but a lot of stuff that I do is unscripted now. It probably comes across actually, but it's better to be unscripted, because you're a bit more sort of fluid, it feels more natural. But anyway, that's how I wanted to approach this today, because I think that I can kind of talk through this thing, and I think it'd be better if I was going to script this actually, but then I decided no, you know, I'm just going to talk and go along. I made some notes from this. Anyway, basically this week I got to go to an event. It was an exclusive event in London, and it was actually at the BAFTA Centre, if you know what that is, in London. It was a really fantastic event. Basically it was Patrick Bach, who's the executive producer obviously of Battlefield 4 and a lot of other previous Battlefield titles, and he was just speaking about the game and the process of creating it, the development process, etc. Now, a lot of people when I were tweeting was like, give us more info, give us more info. You know, I knew going to this event there wasn't going to be tons and tons of new info about the game, because it's only like 2 weeks away, so why the hell would they give loads more revealed information? What this was a more kind of, it was like a really nice there wasn't tons of people there was maybe like 150 people there, so it was a really nice kind of informal event. And it actually was not too dissimilar from some of the lectures that I had when we were in Stockholm, and they were talking about the new Frostbite engine, and they were showing us some of the things that they developed to do with single player, etc. And but actually it was really great for me. It was just nice actually to go, and this kind of was like a fantastic, you know, the beta had only literally ended the day before, and then I go into this thing and we have loads of people there, loads of press, loads of players, etc. And then you know, some DICE people as well. And for me actually it was, although in many ways, you know, I could argue in my mind like it didn't really need to go because we didn't take away a lot from it. Actually, I did take away a lot from it, because it was just a nice sort of summation, you know, it was like a nice sort of conclusion. The beta finishes, and then I go there and Patrick Bach talks about the game and, you know, the whole process and thought process behind it, which was just, yeah, it was a nice kind of conclusion for me to sort of draw my thoughts to a close, as it were. But I'm going to run through some of the notes that I made, and this is just going to be a talking video, guys, where I'm sort of thinking around the game and I explain a few things that he went over and things, so yeah, I hope you enjoy. One of the first things that he was speaking about, oh, actually, I want to mention one other thing. It was very funny. It was very funny because the lecture that he gave, it went on for about 2 hours, and it was him talking in detail about every aspect of development of the game, from the single player to the multiplayer to all of the sort of graphical builds and how they went about approaching water, and I'll touch on a few of those things. But what made me laugh when I was in the lecture, I was sitting there and I was making notes like you do at lectures, and it was great because there was a real mix of people at this event. Okay, so you had like press, and then, as I say, you got gamers and people like this, you know. It was funny because I was sitting there and you could so see who were the gamers and so on. And it made me laugh because you could see all the press and they're there sort of studious and, yeah, listening to everything that's happening, and then you see the gamers, and as I say, it was 2 hours of what was actually quite a detailed breakdown of like every aspect of the game. Now you guys can imagine, for me, I was just like, yeah, this is great, you know, I'm listening to the whole thing. I could see some of the gamers, you know, maybe a little bit younger than me as well, and they're kind of sitting there and you could see they're just like nodding off a little. Oh, it did make me laugh. Anyway, okay, so he was talking about a lot of different elements of the game and the process of developing them. Okay, he started talking originally about sort of what they wanted to get out of Battlefield 4, what it was that they were thinking about with the game, and again, as you might imagine, one of the first things they came onto was to improve the core engine of the game. That means things like improving driving, improving flying, and they wanted really to push into that naval combat. These were areas that they early on identified that they wanted to push into. Also, they wanted to move the technical bar farther up, okay, so improving all of the technical aspects. Again, as you might imagine, that's a fairly kind of straightforward conclusion when you're developing your game for, but nonetheless it's sort of decisions they have to make about what it is exactly they want to do, as well as improving, for example, just the style and tone of the game. But then there's other things to sort of take into account with that, like, for example, the fact that they now have to develop for the next gen consoles. And this was something that he spoke about at length, that their life has been made extremely more difficult than previously, because he was explaining that, you know, if you can imagine, if you're developing just for a normal console, okay, that's out in existence already, where you've got it right there so you can continually test it as you create the game. But the problem that DICE have had is that the next gen consoles obviously are not out, and they're an ongoing process. Like he said at the lecture, they don't actually exist yet. They're not there, they're not live, and even though they can send out like dev build, dev kits, etc., things are constantly changing in regards to the build of the system. So for a long time he said that this was a real problem, and not only that, he made a very specific point, which made me laugh, as you can imagine, that he made a very specific point that Microsoft have actually made DICE's life extremely difficult, because obviously Microsoft kept chopping and changing their ideas about what it was they wanted to do this year. And, you know, they were sort of like, 1 minute they're doing this, then they're not, then they're going to add this back in, then they're not, and they just keep chopping and changing all the time. And he said for them as developers, it's an absolute frustrating nightmare, because 1 minute you think, oh, okay, we know what we're going to do here, then they change their mind, and you go, oh, we're going to change it back again, and then they change their mind. And he was like, you know, seriously, very frustrating. So yeah, good job, MS. He also spoke about the complexity of trying to create a game like this, and how understandably it can be a bit difficult sometimes for consumers to really understand the process of exactly what goes into making a game like Battlefield 4. And I've touched on this before in various videos again, where, you know, it's like you have to try and cut developers some slack sometimes. Games are more complicated than they ever have been before, and it's like, you, with the best will in the world, can want a title to be as, you know, bug-free and perfect as you want it when it comes to release, and people can say, well, I've paid my money and blah blah blah. This is entirely true, but you have to remember that games are not what they were 10 years ago, and that games now have vastly more, you know, they're just much more complex. And also remember that games are far more multi-platform than they ever used to be. I mean, a lot of games often only used to be released on one system, so you can immediately imagine that, you know, the amount of stability that gains you by releasing just for one system is massive compared to what they have to do now, releasing across multiple systems. Now, this is actually one other good thing about the next-gen consoles, is the fact that next-gen consoles are built in much more of a kind of PC structure, so it will actually make, you know, devs' lives a lot easier when it comes to developing new titles, that when they are moving them across different platforms, it's going to make their lives a little simpler. This should improve the quality for everyone. It's, you know, it's another thing where often people are ranting and raving online and they don't actually think through what it is that they're sort of talking about. When it comes to PCs, people are often complaining about consoles and blah 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 blah, and obviously I've been a console user for a long time. But the thing is, as I say, with the next gen consoles, it's going to level things off much more, and it's not just about console users having an experience that's more comparable to PC. It's also about the fact that, as I say, it'll make developing titles across all these platforms easier. So in many ways, the fact that next-gen consoles are more similar to PC in structure may actually benefit PC users as well, because they're always complaining, oh well, our titles have been dumbed down or not progressed properly enough because of the consoles. Well, now that they're sort of more balanced, and as I say, even though PCs obviously over time will become more powerful, etc., and outclass even the next-gen consoles, the fact that the actual structure of how they go about being created, that in many ways will still benefit. And Patrick mentioned about this fact that, technology now allows you to pretty much create whatever you can imagine, whatever it is that you want to make. But he was saying that the challenge now, it used to be that if you had a slightly more powerful system, that would be a fantastic selling point. Obviously though, this is not so much now. Even though people are arguing the semantics between the new next-gen consoles of the Xbox One and the PS4, they're really tit for tat. It's not really a big deal. And so he was saying about how the vision of your game is far more important now than it ever was before, because for sure, of course, you always want your title to be, fun, enjoyable, playable, and, stable, strong, good core gameplay mechanics. But at the same time, you do need to have that vision and imagination that draws players in and makes them really love and sort of pull into the game. And that is ever more important, because the sort of, even if you in the past would have a strong technical aspect for your game, well, that could be sort of outweighed by other things. But now it's all about the vision and creating that, because the technical aspects is almost sort of fundamental in many ways. It's just kind of, whilst of course complex, it is in many ways kind of just a stepping stone to the, the final product, which should be the vision of the people creating the title. And this is only this ties in very nicely to sort of other things and the sort of process of creating. And that process of creating really sort of it gives you a fantastic example of how the studios are. And it's interesting as well, because whenever I hear people from DICE as a company speaking, it only seeks to continue to sort of reaffirm what I have already experienced by speaking to people, which is that they have this fantastic philosophy about how they work and the processes that they go through. And when I came back from Stockholm again, people were very quick, because I was so hyped up and positive about everything, and people were very, very quick to sort of denounce that. It's like, oh, EA have paid you off, Luton, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, no. It's interesting because, like I say, when you hear about how they talk and you see and hear the passion from everybody, it's always from everybody working in the game, you really see and feel it. But I mean, a great example of this was when they were talking about how they went about developing the character models for the game. And with the character models for the game, they didn't just go off of concept art. So normally with a title, you have concept art, and then that gets built into 3D models and put into, development suites, etc. What they did with Battlefield 4 was he said that they actually got live models to come into the studio, and then they had a load of kit, etc., that they actually dressed up the people with, so that then they could look at the models and go, okay, so this is our support guy, he's got his gun there, and he's got like his ammo pouches, etc. How does that look? They were looking at it, from a real world perspective. There's a guy literally standing there in front of him, and if they think, okay, that ammo pouch doesn't quite look right, they'll take it off or move it and give him a different belt or give him some different gloves or whatever. So they literally live modeled the characters until they had them how they wanted to, and then they could mock up concept art from that, do 3D live scans of people so they could build it into sort of 3D models. So again, really fascinating sort of snapshot of how the studio works, and just the kind of creative thinking that they put into sort of developing the game itself. And this creative process for them really expands into a whole range of other areas, the sound being one of them. Now, in my other video I was talking about sort of what was new with Battlefield 4 and what I felt really made it different to Battlefield 3. One of the main things that I highlighted, and that other producers like Level Cap have highlighted, is the massive difference in the sound in the game. And in the beta, I'm sure you would have experienced this for yourself, just the massive changes in sound quality, how it sounds live, and not just weapons, but when you move around in different spaces in the game. I, for one, as well, this is something I noticed a while back actually when we were playing Close Quarters on Zebra Tower, and me and the guys noticed that, for example, just being under, for example, a balcony would make a different sound. So if you move out from that balcony, you hear like a gunshot differently than when you're under the balcony. So it really reflects that kind of actually how sound bounces around and moves, which is fascinatingly clever. And he was explaining about how they go about some of this, how they record all, their live stuff. They go out into the field to record things. Sound reflection, he said, was something that was particularly important for them, because it really gives you that kind of immersive feeling. When you're in a space and you move around, you hear the sound kind of bouncing around you, and it sounds different as you move between different structures. That obviously adds to that real feeling of sort of movement between spaces. But then also there's things like the water effects and sort of garages, and how, again, you hear sound differently in those kind of spaces, especially, for example, if you're in a garage and you have like metal structures around you, it's going to bounce around differently than if you're in an area where there's sound which will absorb more as it's being made. So quite clever to sort of make those differentiations and actually sort of take that on board. But again, water as well. Obviously there's a lot of water involved in Battlefield 4, and players are going to be splashing in and out, jumping out of boats. There's going to be more kind of naval water aspects to the game. And again, not just deep water like oceanic and rivers, but also shallow water, like when you move into a room and you might walk through a shallow pool of water, so you have that splashing sound of, you know, when your feet are only maybe an inch of water. And again, that's all sound that they created. He said that the sound engineers actually went and rented a swimming pool for the day, and they made tons of water sounds, and they were getting in and out of water, recording underwater, all of these things, so that when you transition into the game, all of that stuff is as realistic as they can possibly create it for you. And staying with the water aspect as well, water obviously is a massive part of Battlefield 4. I think many people commented on just how astonishing it was, like nothing you'd seen before. And this was something they really wanted to push, but there's more to it than just how nice it looks, okay? You've got to think of things like the boat physics, for example. I'm sure you will have experienced already, I have, that when you're on, for example, the jet skis, things like this, as you move in the jet skis and you go to turn, sometimes as you turn, that water, it really kicks you. You know, you struggle to kind of control the vehicle because the water is physically working against you. That's an incredibly difficult and very clever way of making that boat react to those different situations. And there's things again like swimming, diving, the way you shoot into the water, the fact that you can actually handle your guns in water as well. You know, you change out to your pistol, you can actually have water combat against other players now. There's other things that he mentioned as well, like scalability, like the fact that when you see water close, okay, you're going to want to render it in a different way than when you pull back at a distance. And again, you have to think about that from a developer point of view, that they're taking that on board, because, you know, if you were rendering as a player when you see everything in the same detail level that you would be when you're close by, just imagine the massive amount of process that that's going to require compared to if it's scalable. So that's something that, again, from a developer point of view, is extremely important. And these are often things that players never would think about. Okay, they're very small technical aspects, but that have such a massive impact on the game. There's other things as well, like when it comes to scalability, you have to think again across all different platforms. So, you know, how are they going to technically be able to handle these things? You have to balance that and adjust it accordingly, so that it doesn't sort of, you know, everyone's fine on PC, but as soon as it goes back down into another console, it, you know, crashes out the game. So you have to make sure that you balance that properly. So again, great insight. And what I thought was one of the best things we saw when it came to actually the sort of water physics themselves was we got shown some test footage when they were actually creating the water originally. And he was explaining again how what they had done was they created, for example, like a classroom space, and then there was like an inch of water covering the whole of the room. They had a player moving around inside this room, and you could see the waves and ripples splashing from the player moving around. And he said that, again, this is part of that development process. So what you would do is create this environment, look at it, okay, how is that water moving? Is it moving correctly? Does it look weird? Is it splashing in the right way? Is it moving physically, you know, as it should do? And then you look at that, assess it. If not, go back, take it, edit it, go back again, then check it out some more. Does it look right? How is it working? And it's all that kind of process of animation and development to sort of see how, you know, perfect they can create this. They need to get it absolutely spot on for players. And then you go from that kind of very small kind of internal environment, sort of physical water aspect, to the much larger ocean tests. And this was a fantastic test to see, with the huge undulating rolling waves, with that fantastic froth that you get on top of water when it's in the ocean from waves splashing around on top of one another, and seeing again that level of detail and sort of illustration of just how it would look, and that sort of that deep rich sort of dark colour that you get with the ocean waves, combined with tons of seagulls and blurred out backgrounds. It just completely immerses you into it. And again, Paracel Storm, some people have been able to play so far. I absolutely cannot wait to play Paracel Storm. And you know, we saw in the beta how different the map changed when the building fell down in Shanghai. So again, remember on Paracel Storm, it has that kind of nice sunny sort of a real Battlefield 1943 Wake Island kind of feel to it. But then when the boat crashes, you get this sort of dark, stormy environment, very much like the Wake Island from Battlefield 3. But again, then moving on into sort of play testing for the game, and he spoke about how play testing was really, really important to see how much fun they could get out of the game, all the different aspects that they could get with the game. And he said that there was more play testing in the first hour of the beta than the whole of the development of the game. And I think that's, you have to take that in part of the fact that just how many people are playing, and that's really what he meant in that phrase. It's not like they've never play tested before, but it's just that so many people are playing. And so, you can imagine from the sheer quantity of playing, the amount of information that they can get back from that is absolutely amazing. And as well, he was very strong to highlight the fact that, you cannot plan everything. And he also said that, if they tried to plan for everything in the game, they would never actually get anywhere with the game, because you can't plan every eventuality, every aspect of the title, and it's very much about sort of getting it to a certain point and then allowing for feedback. Now, I think again this refers back to what I was saying earlier, that the way games are developed now has changed in the respect that it's a much more kind of organic process than it perhaps used to be. It very much used to be that obviously, developers would create their title, box it, out it goes, job done. And I remember I actually read a fantastic article with Sid Meier, who created Civilization, and he was talking about how when the first Civilization game was created, however many years ago that was now, it was a long time ago, but when the first Civilization came out, he said that back then, there was no sort of emailing or anything like that. So the only way that they could get feedback from players about how to update and improve the game was when players would actually write physical letters and send them to the studio saying, hey, we didn't like how this unit moved. When you eventually make another game, can you try and consider that? I mean, you can't imagine that now, can you? But that's how it used to be. Whereas nowadays, it's like as simple as people just posting tweets, posting on the forums, posting on Reddit, blogs. There's literally so many ways for people to kind of communicate to DICE exactly the issues they're having and then update them. It really reminds me of the fact of how people sort of lose perspective sometimes of just how far we've come. I mean, the very, very fact that you can patch a game at all, let alone patch it within a week or a day to fix something, is astonishing. And as I say, this was something that Sid Meier had commented on, the fact that, back years ago when you were creating a game, if you released a game and it had a problem, that was it. There's nothing you could do about it. Once it was out there, that was it. Full stop. That's it. The game is there. That's how the game is, and you just have to deal with it. There's no fixing, there's no tweaking, that's just it. I mean, can you imagine if that's how it was now? And I think people need to sort of try and remember that a little bit when, obviously we're in a different time now and things have changed, and so of course you can do these kind of updates, and all games are doing those kind of updates. But I do think it is worth remembering that sort of things have not always been that simple, and I think people should just appreciate the fact that there is actually this capability now. It's an amazing capability that a game can be continually updated, tweaked and refined even past its release date. And I don't think that that should be considered something that's a negative thing when people say, okay, on release they expect like this perfect game. No, the developers are doing what they can to kind of produce a title to sort of be as good as they feel it can be at release, but it's always a kind of ongoing process, and it will be, and that's how games are going to be from now on. If people don't like that fact, I think they're just going to literally have to sort of deal with it, because that's how it's going to be, whether they like it or not. Okay, and then just coming up towards the end now, but again, coming back to those console systems now, something that he mentioned a lot about the PS4 and Xbox One was that these next generation consoles are going to give a much more PC-like experience for players. It's going to be the first time they're going to be able to have 64 players, they're going to be playing in 60 FPS, and the graphics are going to be vastly improved. Now, I can say and vouch for this, having played on the Xbox One at Eurogamer. A lot of people asked me about this, and yeah, seriously, the quality was there. Alright, you really did feel like you're having as good an experience as you would on the PC. I think people are going to be very surprised just how good an experience they are having. And remember, these are some of the first titles to be released on the system. Give it a year or two, your experience is going to be increased and enjoyed exponentially. The more time developers have to get used to a system, the better that they can get out of it. And so these launch titles already look amazing and seem to be a great deal of fun, but going forward it's going to be even better. And bringing it back to the whole technology aspect as well, I mean, he mentioned about the fact that, games don't always have to be the most innovative in terms of technology or have the best gimmicks to have an amazing product. And he was giving the example, for example, games like The Last of Us. The Last of Us had a really fantastic storyline. It grabbed you, it pulled you into the game, and it just went to show that, with The Last of Us, there were some things that have been kind of considered in terms of the sort of the weapon systems and so on and so on, but the actual game itself, the real focus was the characters and that aspect of it. The technical level and even the graphics, like the graphics were very, very nice, but they weren't sort of revolutionary or mind-blowing. I mean, they were great, but again, it didn't raise the bar in any significant way. The reason that game was so amazing was because of the development process that put everything together that just made it right, from the very small sort of mechanical aspects of the game to the very grandiose, beautiful story of the title itself. And I think that's what Patrick Bach was trying to say there, is that, to have an amazing title, it's about creating this sort of fantastic combination of elements that all come together to make a fantastic product. And I think that's exactly what Battlefield 4 is going to be. Okay, and then just to round off at the end, so there was a Q&A session at the end, people asking some different questions, different things about the game. One of the questions was about sort of why can't you make all buildings in the entire sort of map destructible? A lot of people, I've actually seen this commented a few times around. The obvious answer for that is what he said, which is that, if you tried to make every building destructible in the same way as the big tower building is destructible, you wouldn't be able to play the game. It would just crash and be unplayable. There's way too much going on there, just even with one building. So again, it's one of those things where people kind of voice these opinions and you see them around on the internet, but again, you really have to kind of keep your feet on the ground and just understand exactly what it is that's capable. So my question to Patrick Bach, first of all, there's some things you have to try and keep in mind, because I know straight away people are going to be like, well, you should have asked about this specific element, or why didn't you find out about this or this? When you're at these kind of events or sessions, there's no point asking something that's too specific, because there's two things that are going to happen. If you ask a really specific technical question about something in the game that maybe people want to know about very validly, but two things are going to happen. If you are at an event like that, what you want is to pose a question that will give them a chance to actually give a sort of proper feedback response, not just a bullet point. If you ask a very, very specific question about one technical thing, what will happen is two things. They'll either give you a bullet point response and say, it's this, and then that's your question done. Or they simply won't know because it's too specific, okay? And this was happening this was happening at Gamescom. People were asking questions on the stream, which were very sort of bullet point questions about specific things, and then people either wouldn't know or they would just answer it in a 1 second soundbite, which isn't very interesting, and it doesn't give you sort of much of a feeling that you've actually sort of had some kind of valid insight into that person's knowledge about what it is that they do. So my question to Patrick Bach was, how do you find the difficulty of balancing the core aspect of the game, the things that, true Battlefielders, Battlefield players, the core aspects of the game, like the rock, paper, scissors and all that sort of stuff, how do you balance that against bringing in enough new things that people feel like you've actually changed enough in the game? And I went on to sort of say to him as well about how, people are often very critical that you've changed too much or not changed enough, or there hasn't been enough sort of expansion on other things in the game and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, he gave a great response back, which was to sort of confirm again what I had sort of said about how what the core aspects of Battlefield are. And he said about how the core aspects are this rock, paper, scissors feature. And he said that this is something that Lars Gustafsson, he said that they often talk about this in the studio, this idea of what is the core Battlefield experience, what does it mean to you to play Battlefield? And it is that feeling of, you're never in total domination, that you do have weaknesses and strengths as a player, and your choice of equipment and the way that you play the game determines how successful you're going to be in different situations. And then from that, they take on and build into all those other things that I mentioned at the start of this video. Okay, things like improving the core aspect, the driving, the flying, the naval, improving that tech bar, improving the style and tone, all of these other elements. And that's really what I kind of took away from this lecture, and it's what I've taken away from other things as well, other events and sort of people that I've spoken to from DICE and other elements, which is just this feeling that and it's also kind of how me and some other YouTubers have talked about what you would expect Battlefield 4 to be. How do you expect that end result of a game to be? And that's really what it is. It's this refined process, this development of the core title into something that is bigger, is better, but at the same time stays true to the form that is Battlefield. So guys, that was my little talk today off the back of this lecture from Patrick Bach, executive producer of Battlefield 4 for DICE. I hope that you've enjoyed. I hope that it's maybe given a little bit of insight into the development process of the game, some of the things therein, and maybe with this understanding you can be a little bit more forgiving about certain elements when it comes to the game. But for me, as I say, it was just a great kind of conclusion to sort of round off the beta with. It was a great to sort of just come back to some of the, even a lot of these things were some things that I knew already, or things that I had thought about before, but it's great sometimes to kind of revisit stuff. I always say this, whether it's technical sort of skills in game or whether it's just thought processes around a title, and in understanding them some more, perhaps we can also enjoy them a little bit more as well. Thanks again for watching, guys. If you have enjoyed it today, please drop me a like, drop a comment below as well. I'll see you next time, guys. Much more stuff coming up this week on Battlefield 4.